Welcome to Illicit Liaisons, where each week we talk about the good, the bad, and the naughty of romance fiction. I am Jenna Hart. I am a romance author and ghostwriter, and I'm also the owner of swoonworthyhea.com, an online community for people who love to read romance like I do. If you haven't visited swoonworthyhea.com, please come by. You can create a free account there, and then you can participate in groups talking about your favorite romance fiction. You can start a group, and now, brand new, finally working, you can actually create your very own blog. So if you wanted to start a book blog, a fan blog, or maybe you're an author who needs an author blog, you can start one at swoonworthyhea.com for free. We have information on the site on how to add it to your account and how to set it up. You can even monetize your blog if you would like to start making money talking about romance fiction. How cool is that? So don't wait. Visit swoonworthyhea.com to see all the great stuff we have over there for people who love to read romance fiction. I have one final announcement before we get to the topic of our show, and that is swoonworthyhea.com is going to be hosting a Facebook romance author takeover on February 10th from noon to 4 and then 6 to 10. Those are Eastern times. This is an event where we have authors coming in to share their books, to offer giveaways and freebies, and just interact with you. It's a great place to find your next book boyfriend or your next favorite author. I know that when I participate in takeaways, I always find some of my most loyal readers. So if you're interested in just hanging out with other romance readers and talking with romance writers, you're definitely going to want to save the date and stop by, check in, see all the fun stuff that's going on. You can learn more by visiting swoonworthyhea.com or visit the swoonworthyhea.com page over at Facebook. Just click on the event tab and click the notification that you will be there. If you are an author, there are a few spots still open, and if you'd like to participate, you can contact me through the swoonworthyhea.com website or our Facebook page, and I'll be happy to let you know how you can sign up. Today's show, I thought we could talk about tropes. Here's an interesting thing I have discovered since becoming a ghostwriter. My clients do something that's called write to market, which means they go to Amazon, they figure out what are the top selling romance books, and they ask me to write something that have 2 or 3 tropes from the best selling romances. However, as a writer writing my own work, I never think in terms of what tropes I'm going to write about. Now, all my books do have tropes, but they start with this idea, and I begin writing, and I'm able to recognize that there's a trope there, but I don't go into it saying, I want to write a book on XYZ trope. I also recently watched some YouTube videos where people were sharing some of their favorite or not so favorite tropes. And it occurred to me that some of the tropes that I have to write that are apparently very popular are not necessarily tropes that I like very much. And the tropes that I like, I don't know if other people don't like them, so they don't sell, but I don't necessarily see them as much. Now, one thing to consider is that most books have more than one trope. So some of the books I'm going to share with you that have my favorite tropes may have other tropes that are more popular. But I think if you kind of analyze what it is you read, there's probably some tropes that really stand out to you that you definitely are interested in buying, and some tropes that maybe not so much. So I thought I'd start with sharing what are some of my very favorite tropes with you, and maybe some of these are your very favorite as well. I'm going to share some that I don't like, and maybe you're going to disagree with me. I'd love to hear what your faves and not so favorites are, and you could let me know visiting swoonworthyhea.com, where this podcast is hosted, and click the Illicit Liaisons tab at the top and let me know, because I'm curious. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my favorite trope. I'm going to go ahead right off the bat and just give you my one all-time favorite trope, and that is the second chance at love. And this actually ties into another favorite of mine that will come up on the list, because to me, second chance is basically a couple that had been together before, something tore them apart, and now in the book, they are given a second chance to get that love right. So in some ways, it's like destiny playing a part that fate has put them together. And I love that. It just makes me swoon. My all-time favorite book in this particular trope is Persuasion by Jane Austen, which is the last book that she completed. And if you haven't read Persuasion, I really encourage you to, even if you don't read old fiction. I know Pride and Prejudice is usually considered her favorite. It's probably the most well-known of her books, and it's a good book. I'm not saying it isn't. It's definitely one of my top as well, but Persuasion is just such a lovely book. I just love that book. There are film adaptations. I haven't seen the most recent one. I've been kind of resistant to watch it, even though I did see it is on Passionflix. But my favorite version is the one starring Amanda Root, which came out in the 1990s. And of course, it is just a single movie, so there are parts of the book that are cut out, but I just felt like that really encapsulated how I felt Anne and Frederick were sort of navigating each other and dancing around each other through the book. Because when their second chance comes, when he comes back into her life, he's seemingly indifferent to her, and yet there's very subtle things going on to indicate that that is not the case. And both those actors do a really good job at letting us see that there is emotion there for them, for the other person. And yet it's pretty well hidden to just about everybody else, including the other person. So I just really love Persuasion. And in fact, I pay homage to Persuasion in the second book of the Southern Heat series that I wrote, called Meant to Be, which is a second chance at love story. And in fact, there's a scene in there where Persuasion is mentioned in it, just because I just loved that book and felt like I had to call it out, since I was at the time writing a second chance at love. Now, Meant to Be actually is a contemporary book. It's not set in past time, but it definitely has some ties and similarities in that in Meant to Be, Sydney is persuaded by her family to not follow through on her engagement with Mitch. And there's also a lot of misunderstandings and things like that going on. But of course, the original Persuasion is Anne is persuaded by a family friend to not marry Frederick because he might be a nice person, but he's just not financially suitable for the daughter of a baron. My next favorite trope is the friends to lovers trope. There's just something really nice about two friends falling in love. And I kind of see it as, you know, the relationship develops everything that it needs to be long-term sustainable up front, and then the love comes second. You know, a lot of romances, we have instant attraction and all that stuff goes on, but you kind of wonder, like, do they have what it takes to sustain a relationship over the long term? Chemistry and lust can only take you so far. So in the friends to lovers trope, we kind of have the opposite, where they have the respect, they have the trust, they have mutual interests, and then the love then comes after that, and they have all the pieces there that they need to have something long term. There's a couple of books that I felt did this well. Lauren Blakely's book, Hard Rock, which I think is the first in that series. It's about Spencer and Charlotte, and they are actually business partners. So you have that trope in there. And he needs a fake fiance. So you got that trope in there as well. But what really made me enjoy this book the most is just seeing this couple that are partners and clearly very good friends. They have a respect for each other. They joke and laugh. And now they have to kind of pretend to be something else. And as they do that, their feelings grow even deeper. One of the things that's really fun about this book is it's primarily told from Spencer's point of view. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure if Charlotte's point of view is in it at all. I can't remember. And a lot of these books, the Hard Rock books are mostly all the male point of view, and there might be just some short little interludes with the female point of view. But here is Spencer, who is, having to pretend to be in love with his best friend, or he'll find himself attracted to her or responding to her in a way that he feels is inappropriate as her friend, and him kind of telling himself like that's not what friends do and trying to talk himself out of it. And then, and then things develop. And one of the things I enjoy about Lauren Blakely's books is that not a lot of angsty conflict between the characters. A lot of time the black moment isn't very black, and yet it's still very enjoyable because these characters are really fun to kind of hang out with and watch them as they navigate their feelings for the other person. Another book that does it pretty good is Savor the Moment by Nora Roberts, where we have Lauren, who has always had a crush on her friend's brother, and but it just seems like that will never happen. And then, of course, there's a stolen kiss that changes everything. The next trope I really like is opposites attract, and I really like it when there's really clever and fun banter. I am a big fan of banter. Now, opposites attract is sometimes also linked with like enemies to lovers, but there's some enemies to lovers that I don't really like. And what I like is just two opposite people who are kind of a lot of times butting heads or really shouldn't mesh together, actually, in fact, go together perfectly. I really see Pride and Prejudice as falling into this trope. I see Elizabeth as this effervescent, lively, outgoing, outspoken woman. And we've got Darcy, who I know comes off as prideful, but in fact, in my mind, he's just kind of socially inept. And yet they are perfect for each other. Another good book for this, I thought, was Beach Read, which is about two authors. She's a romance author and he is a doom and gloom author. So already that puts them at opposites. That's a really fun read as well. The Hating Game, which I know would be seen as an enemy to lovers, but again, I kind of actually see that as an opposites attract because we have Lucy, who is, again, this effervescent, bubbly, outgoing person that everybody likes. And then we've got Joshua, who is this cynical, kind of dark, occasionally mean guy that a lot of people don't like or are afraid of, and yet they are perfect for each other. I used Opposites Attract in my own book, Drawn to Her, which is the first book in the Southern Heat series, because not only are Drake and Lexi opposites in personality, they're actually opposites in their physicality. He's tall, dark, and broody, and she is small, petite, light, and outgoing. And it was really fun to kind of write that, how they were so different and yet at the same time so perfect for each other. My fourth favorite trope is the destiny or soulmate type trope. And in my mind, all the romance books that I write or read, in my mind, that's just how it is. There's, one person for everybody. Now, I do not necessarily believe that in real life. I know it's not true. I know that there's people out there that have loved and maybe lost the person that they had committed their lives to, and then ultimately someday later they find somebody else that they are able to love. So I know that this is just sort of kind of one of those fairy tale type things, but I love it. It makes me go all swoony. One of my favorite examples of this are J.R. Ward's Black Dagger series. My favorite moments in almost all those books is the moment when this big badass vampire sees the person that he's fated to, and his reaction to that, and there's a physical change that goes in him that all the other vampires around him sense, and it's kind of hilarious. I just love that idea. I see it in the book Jane Eyre as well, that Jane Eyre and Rochester really, in my mind, in a lot of ways are destined to each other because only those two could make each other happy. And so I really see that book, their soulmates are destined to be together. And the other one that I really see that falls in this trope is Outlander, which, if you think about it, I mean, Claire and Jamie have quite this epic love, and they're born like 200 years apart. So that really has to be fate and destiny, that she just happens to go up to those rocks, go through them in time, and meets him. Especially since at the time she's married to somebody else, and how that all evolves, how that relationship evolves. And then even in the other books where she comes back into modern time, and how she and Frank just aren't able then to connect like they did before, because Jamie is still always there, even though Jamie has died in Culloden. And of course, when she's back in our time, Jamie is obviously dead because he's not going to live 200 years. But she thinks he dies in the Battle of Culloden, and then only 20 years later does she find out that that wasn't the case, and then she goes back and finds him, and then we're off on their epic journey again. So in my mind, Outlander is probably one of the best examples of kind of a destiny soulmate type of romance. And my fifth favorite trope would be what I call stuck together or forced together trope. Now, a lot of people see this as like snowed in a blizzard in a cabin in the mountains, or stranded at sea, or stuck in an elevator. But for me, my favorite that really encompass this trope are ones where the couples are forced together because they have some sort of common enemy, or they have some sort of common goal that they have to achieve. So you see this a lot in romantic suspense, where they have to help each other out, whether they like it or not. Maybe it's a romantic adventure, maybe it's some sort of quest that they're on. Almost all the romantic suspense I read encapsulate this, where the couple's kind of forced together to work together. But the two I thought I would mention, one is The Reef by Nora Roberts, and I chose that one because it's, really involves kind of treasure hunting and their suspense, and so it's different than just kind of running from the bad guy type of thing that a lot of the other books. But Sandra Brown has a lot of books that involve this. Linda Howard has books that involve this. There's a lot of authors that have this kind of trope where they have to work together because there's some bad guy out there that's they need to fight against or run from. So those are my 5 favorite tropes. If a book has a description that has one of these tropes in it, I'm likely to be interested. Now I thought I'd go through the 5 tropes that I do not like at all. And the first one is a love triangle. I hate that. And I suppose it goes to the fact that I'm all about destiny and soulmates and all that, because a love triangle is like the opposite of that. The idea that there could be another person and teasing us with this other person. Now, I have read books where there might be another person, but it's very clear to me that one of those persons is the actual soulmate, the person that they're going to end up with, and the other person is just kind of adding conflict. I'm okay with that, but it's when there's this even division and it could go either way. I hate that. I really don't like that at all. It's one of the reasons that I had questioned the whole Jacob versus Edward thing in the Twilight, because in my mind, it was Edward all the way. It should be Edward all the way. And her kind of teasing that through the books did annoy me a little bit. I was annoyed that Jacob got a whole point of view in the book and Edward didn't. Now, I do have Midnight Sun, which did finally come out, which is Twilight from Edward's point of view, and I'm very eager to read it because I do remember reading the segment online and thinking this is how Twilight should have been written, because Edward seemed much more scary from his point of view than when we saw it from Bella's. So anyways, love triangles, no. The second one I'm not a big fan of is taboo. And I suppose I should define taboo because sometimes I see people using taboo for things that really may not be that big a deal, like, falling for your older brother's best friend or something like that. In my mind, that isn't taboo. I'm not necessarily against like a professor-student relationship if the student is like a graduate student, definitely not in high school. I would not be for that. And I'm not even so sure college, but college age just seems so young to me. But a graduate student, professor, that doesn't bother me. The hardcore taboos do bother me. A lot of it seems kind of weird and really, I guess, pushing against my delicate sensibilities, which I don't really feel like I'm highly delicate. I mean, I will read spicy romance. I'm not a fan of BDSM and all that kind of stuff, although it's not on my list. I've read some, but I'm not a huge fan of it. It doesn't necessarily offend me. I just don't understand it. But there are some taboo situations. For example, daddy's best friend. I'm not a big fan of something like that. That just seems kind of weird, and it feels like it's trying to tap into something incestuous without actually being incestuous. I don't know. But I'm not a huge fan of things that are really highly charged taboo. Another trope that I don't like, that actually I think is pretty popular because I'm asked to write it a lot by my clients, is the secret child. It is the secret pregnancy, the secret child. That makes me nuts. I really don't like that. Now, if it's a secret pregnancy and our man finds out before the birth of the baby that he's the father and they're able to reconcile and all that, I can go with that. But to have a man discover years later when his kid is 3, 4, 5, 12 years old, that really guts me because I just feel like this man has missed so much. And if he's our romantic hero, it just breaks my heart because obviously we're rooting for him. We like him. So how horrible is it that he's missed all this in his child's life? And the child has missed all this in knowing their father. And it's kind of hard to have a female protagonist keep that from the man and have us root for her. Writing a secret child is really a balancing act because these two people, it's basically a second chance at love, right? These two people loved each other at one point and she ends up pregnant and doesn't tell him. So how do you not like her for that? Because that's just kind of a mean thing to do unless he's a terrible man. But if he's our hero, he can't be a terrible man. So how do you keep both these people good people and have this work out? And of course, there's ways to do it. I have written these type of books for my clients, but I really don't like them because it just kind of breaks my heart when I think about how much the child and the father have missed by being apart. Another trope that I'm not a big fan of are those huge age differences, either way. And again, it goes back to that idea of we've got this 19-year-old girl and this 40-year-old guy, and it just feels like it's trying to tap into those Oedipus and Electra complexes that, I don't know, that I just don't really like that. And, one of the things that you'll see in the few that I've read, and I've read a couple, I've had to write a couple, is that these young women who are 19 or 20 and these 40-year-old men, these women are basically written to be mature beyond their years. In which case, I'm sort of like it's defeating the purpose. I mean, they're 19, but if they're acting 25 or 30, why not just make them 25 or 30, The other thing that is used in here often is that they're virginal. I wouldn't say that's a trope I hate, where the young woman is a virgin, but it just, again, seems like an extra thing to add to the titillation that just is not something that is of interest to me. So I'm not a big fan of age differences. And what's interesting to me is I recently watched on Passion Flix Gabriel's Inferno, and that is a case where he's a professor and she is a graduate student. And when you watch the movie, the age difference, I was wondering about the age difference between them, and I couldn't quite figure it out. I know that when the first time they met, she was 17, and I believe he was a graduate student, so he was at least 22, 23, 24. So maybe we're looking at a 6 or 7 year difference. And then during the rest of the movie, she's probably, I think it's 6 or 7 years later. So she is like 23, which would put him at 30, which doesn't seem like that big of age difference to me. So when I'm talking about age difference, I'm talking about she's 20 and he's 40. The final trope that I'm not a huge fan of is what I call the Stockholm trope. And I know there's other names for this, but I'm going to call it Stockholm trope. It is the trope in which our quote unquote hero has kidnapped or attacked or done something bad, and then somehow he becomes the hero and she falls for him. I don't like that trope. I remember, and I'm about to age myself here, in the 80s watching General Hospital and that whole Luke and Laura thing. And they were very popular, and for years and years, 20, 30 years, people probably still love Luke and Laura. But that started with him raping her. And that just, to me, is weird that she would then fall for him. And how they dealt with that, it's crazy to me how they got beyond that. But there are romance books that really start out like that, where there's questionable consent, or he's kidnapped her and being kind of a jerk to her, or all sorts of things like that, where she's kind of falling for him because he's the only one there. And even though he's been mean or kidnapped her, she is reliant on him, and somehow that transfers into a love. I'm not really into that kind of thing. Now, just because I'm telling you that these are the tropes I don't like, I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm not saying they're wrong. I totally get that the books we love to read are subjective, that what I like may not be what you like, and what you like may not be what I like. So I don't want you to take it in that vein. I'm just sharing, these are what I like, these are what I don't like. And of course, there's a lot of tropes out there that I'm kind of neutral about. You know, I'll read them, but knowing that that's the trope doesn't necessarily draw me or detract me from it. For example, enemies to lovers, like I said, sometimes I don't like it depending on what it is. Workplace romances, I have no opinion of them. I mean, if that's what the setting is, that's great, but it's not necessarily a trope I go after. Or the fake relationships, that's all fine and well, but it's not necessarily a trope I go after and pursue and consume. If it happens to be a part of the story, that's all fine and good as well. In terms of my favorite and not my favorite, these are just the things I like and don't like. I would be curious to hear what you like and don't like, whether you agree with me on some or don't agree with me on others. Again, you can visit swoonworthyhea.com and click on the Illicit Liaison tab to find this podcast, and you can let me know in the comments what your favorites are and what your favorites aren't. That's it for this week's show. Before I let you go, I just want to remind you again, over at swoonworthyhea.com, we do have the blogs now set up, and all members can set up a blog. You have to join first, and then I have a video there that tells you how you can go ahead and create your own blog, set it up, and even how you can monetize it if that's what you would like to do. I did do a podcast a couple weeks ago on how to start a book blog and how to make money from it. And if you didn't listen to that, you might want to go ahead and check that out first, and then you can go set up your blog at swoonworthyhea.com. Also want to remind you that we do have the Author Takeover event coming up February 10th. If you like to hang out with authors and get free books and win stuff, you're definitely going to want to check that out. You can visit the Swoonworthy HEA page over at Facebook, click on the events, and then you can go ahead and let us know that you're coming or you might be coming, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, this is Jenna Hart from swoonworthyhea.com and the Illicit Liaison podcast, wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.